is about working with older kids. I mean, mine are teenagers.
The ones that don't want to talk to you?
The ones that don't want to talk to you. I mean, yeah. I mean, when they're younger, you can sometimes get that curiosity. But then when they're older, they're like, you're not cool anymore. So, I mean, what kind of suggestions would you have for older kids?
Validating independence. Recognize, yes, absolutely. Like just they're in that stage of they're trying to find themselves.
Right.
Like, aren't we all trying to find themselves, right, in that perspective? But that's when, and I think Scott can kind of speak on that science of the brain part of all the activity that's happening. And this is when emotions start to go, and they're more in their emotional mind, which means that logic is off. Your brain naturally can either be either or. So they're either in emotion mind or logic mind. And then with effort, you can kind of be in the middle. But teenagers are all in that's why middle school is really challenging, because you have everybody who's like, and things like that. So identifying the independence, encouraging that, and then even having a nonverbal check-in, maybe having a box of questions or a family check-in once a week, just to say, hey, just want to see if there's anything anybody wants to bring up, or this is what I've noticed, or those kind of things. But that's okay. Try not to force it.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you pull too much, they're gonna pull.
Yep.
They're gonna pull back. But just being open to it and providing that space. Yeah.
And sometimes they just need us to listen.
Right.
So just picking up on some of the things that they may be saying, especially if it's negative statements or comments about themselves. Know who their friends are. Know who their support system is. If you say, okay, who do you feel comfortable with when something is going on with you? Because it may not be the parents. It could be your best friend. Can we get somebody above 18 or older that don't think like you?
Yeah.
But just make sure you check in and listen. And we don't have to do the talking all the time. We can listen.
Without the judgment part.
Without
That's
the
the
judgment.
hard part, because it goes, or they say, you shouldn't say that, don't feel that way, or
Well,
they
that's
might.
why I don't talk to you.
Right. Because you don't listen to me.
listen.
Right. And that's a skill that as parents we need to practice, like true listening. That's real. That's a skill. And it's okay if they say something and you go, and then you go, wait, no, I want this to be start over. Like, I want this to be safe. Let me work on myself. I don't want to, I want you to feel comfortable. I'm going to put the mommy hat down, and I just want to be able to support you and coach you through this. Because sometimes they'll say stuff to us and we'll go into like, I can't believe you did that, or what did you say? And then it cuts them off. So being able as a parent to do some things to ground yourself, pushing your feet into the floor, having something, playing with your shirt, taking a deep breath, because sometimes what you hear is hard. So that's okay. And then it's okay to say, wow, that was a lot. Let me process that. Thank you for sharing that and validate. Thank you for trusting me to hear that. And then you go somewhere and are like, oh my gosh.
Help. Yes.
No discussion of teenagers should ever end without a conversation about what the brain is actually doing during those years. Okay, so the human brain doesn't finish developing into its adult configuration until the mid-20s. So when kids are in their teens, they're still in a very rapid process of brain development. And it's not the kind of brain development that was going on earlier when those circuits are coming online to teach them how to walk, et cetera, right? These are the circuits of adulthood that are developing, right? So those parts of the brain that are changing so rapidly, weekly, monthly, right, are changing that brain from a child brain into an adult brain. Okay, so what that means is that there's going to be a natural rift between somebody with an adult brain and somebody with an adolescent brain. Okay, and so in some senses, you can't expect for the adolescent to necessarily kind of have the self-regulation, the self-reflection that you do. But that doesn't mean you can't model it for them and expect it of them in little chunks, right? They're not going to all of a sudden have an adult brain, right, just because you want them to. But you can model that for them. And it doesn't have to be a struggle, right? And so I think just the awareness that those circuits are developing, and you'll see the changes in a kid between age 13 and 14. They grow up a lot, right? Well, that's that circuitry getting sculpted, right? So if you think about it as a biological process and not just a conflicted social interaction, right? That doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it gives people an opportunity to view it through a different lens and take advantage of what we know. And I mean, conversations with teenagers about the fact that their brain is developing can be incredibly productive and engaging, right? So maybe educate yourself a little bit about that. There are some good resources out there, right? And be able to have that as a topic of conversation. It's self-reflection in a really interesting way. So just be aware of that. That there are those differences there. You can model the adult brain functioning and set your expectations accordingly.
I actually had a question along those lines. So I found it difficult with mine when they're entering adolescence, and there's sort of a lot of those big emotions and big feelings, and it does feel similar to when they're really small, but now they're 12, 13, 14, and they got all these huge feelings. Plus, they have this amazing language of mental health that I'm just learning, in my 40s. They already know all of these things, and they're saying things like, well, this just made me feel really anxious and da-da-da-da-da. And so how do you kind of differentiate when it is just something that is probably natural development, they're having these big fluctuations, these big growth, these big changes, or is there something more underlying going on? There is maybe some anxiety, or maybe we are dealing with some depression, and sort of walking that path carefully, because they have, I feel like, sometimes more of awareness of mental health language than I do. And so I always try to be very careful about how I approach it. And I think sometimes I just don't know exactly the right questions to ask, and maybe what are we dealing with.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
hard
wanna-
to know if they're like catastrophizing or if this is like a real issue. Sometimes.
Everything feels very dramatic.
Yeah.
And I remember the same thing.
Right.
But on the parent end, it is really hard to say, okay, well, this has been like a month or more of this feeling very dramatic. Is that just normal development, or is there something else going on, and I need to turn to another resource, to a therapist or something, trying to decide, I think, when to take those steps, because I think also looking at your child and saying, like, let's go see a therapist feels very dramatic.
Yeah. And I want to encourage, there is no wrong question. Like, I think we could put a lot of pressure on ourselves sometimes. I've even done it as a provider of like, am I asking the right questions? And we put pressure on ourselves, and then it stops the flow of a general conversation. So if someone says, I'm anxious, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. What does that feel like? When does it happen? What are some things that you hear yourself saying? What is your mind telling you? Because sometimes that's the big time where they want to identify, right? They want to find a group. So sometimes it could be like, oh, I must be anxious. And it's like, well, maybe you're excited. Maybe you're just nervous. So finding levels, online there's a lot of different resources like the feelings wheel and all different types of the intensity of the emotion matters. So anxiety is healthy. It's good for us. We should have, if I see a bear, which, I'm going to be anxious and I'm going to run, like it's there as a protector. So it's like, okay, where were you when you were feeling this? And then be like, okay, what was going on around you, or how were you, what was going on before? Just that curiosity is really going to help. You can't really evoke more anxiety by talking about it. It's actually the opposite. So the more that you talk about something and normalize it, then they're like, oh, and they become curious about it. And that can bring in logic and help to kind of resolve or kind of uncover different things. Yeah. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I think maybe just what are some resources that, parents of adolescents could turn to specifically to keep in mind that there are a lot of developmental things happening, and then also, don't put too much pressure on yourself to make it perfect, but maybe I'm always going to do better with like suggested questions, just like I asked for the smaller kids, so I don't overthink it and not communicate what I wanted to.
Yeah, there are great resources at the National Institutes of Health. Okay. Right, so the various institutes at NIH, so there's a National Institute of Mental Health, National Institute of Child Development, right? So just nih.gov, and it's easy to search into that for, child development, adolescent development. You get in there and search, there's just incredible resources. They got great people there that collect the research-based findings and then condense them down into reader-friendly little modules of things. So NIH, I'm a big fan of sending people to the NIH. But the other thing I wanted to focus on your question is that you pointed out that, you know, adolescent behavior it's different than adult behavior. So, but when does the difference become something you should be paying attention to, right? So you're kind of looking for differences superimposed on differences, which can be really hard, right? So again, it's kind of like back to what we were saying earlier about the little kids. You are the authorities, right? You know those kids better. So when you notice a change, say like, yeah, my adolescent's hyper emotional or whatever, kind of on and off. But if it sustains for a really long time, or the kid gets sad and they stay sad longer, or they get more sad, you know, for a period of time, those are things to pay attention to. You could say the same thing about anxiety or sadness, right? But I really encourage people to look for physiological changes in how they eat, changes in how they sleep, changes in their physical activity, changes in how they look to you physically. So, because a lot of times a person's emotional life, they can't bring it out front, and against the backdrop of all these brain changes in adolescence, there's like an internal chaos going on in there, normally. So the emotional thing is hard for them to bring forward, but they can't hide the physical. If they're losing weight, if they're gaining weight, if they're sleeping way too much, way more than usual, or way less. Those are the kinds of things. Has their appetite changed?